They don't really understand their costs and ultimately their margin structure. Stop doing the things that don't work. I get it. There are things that might not be working in your business that arguably do need to be fixed, but there's likely a lot of things in your business that are not working that instead of continuing to do, you should stop doing and get them out of your business. When your business gets larger, but your profitability percentage and absolute dollars are not keeping up with it, your business is ultimately getting weaker, more frail. We call it profititis. And almost always, it's sucking the life out of you as the owner and draining your gas tank.
So you are an expert of profitability. You call yourself the profit doctor. Is that right?
Yes, definitely. Always scary to say you're an expert at something, but if I were to hang my hat on one nail, it would be helping business owners with their profitability.
Okay, and as I was doing research, there's a core theme that kept coming up in what I read, and that theme was that most companies have a profit problem, not a revenue problem. Can you explain that a little bit to me?
Yeah. Let me just maybe refine that just a little bit. You could imagine that with any type of business in that industry and size bracket, there's a distribution of profitability. There's the top quartile, the bottom quartile, and a couple quartiles in the middle there. So the top quartile is generally doing really well with profitability, but the bottom half of that stack is unsurprisingly below average. And I help those company owners in particular who are below average adopt some of the best practices and techniques of that top quartile of profitability so that they can very quickly improve their profitability. And so if you think about it again, let's say a $10 million plumbing business. For the spectrum of $10 million plumbing businesses, there are those that are high profitability and low profitability. And we wouldn't have to pretend too hard, that bottom quartile, let's say $10 million a year plumbing companies in terms of bottom quartile profitability, they don't need more revenue to be average profitability for $10 million. They need to do some other stuff. And that other stuff would fall under the umbrella of improving profitability. And now that we're talking about plumbing, fix profitability leaks.
I love it. I love it. So let's start with the most basic of questions, right? What is average profitability for, let's use the example of a $10 million plumbing company?
Absolutely. So there's quite a range. You could imagine, and here might be a good example. Let's compare a staffing company with a recruiting company. Or actually, let's do better in your industry. Let's compare an architectural firm with a home builder. So a home builder actually has to pay for the materials, for example, that build that home. An architectural firm will just say 100% of what they do is services. So there's no materials costs. So you might imagine that 100% of that architectural firm is fees revenue. Now they have labor, but they don't really have a lot in the way of materials. So theoretically, their profitability percentage, or their even gross margin percentage, might be a lot higher than a construction company that has to eat the cost of, let's say, 1 million subcontractors and a lot of materials. So the range of profitability does differ by industry. But a worldwide average number, depending on who you're asking, might be from 6 to 10%. So if you're in a business that has a lot of materials cost, we might just pretend that 10% is average. If you're in a business that's really services without a lot of heavy-duty subcontractor costs or materials cost, average might be a little higher than that.
Thank you. Now let's talk about the difference between gross profitability and net profitability, because you mentioned gross.
That is an ocean where so many tears are spilled by so many companies unwittingly. You told me, hey, I might ask you a question that some people don't know something. And what if they did? Or I'm totally butchering that question. But the difference between gross margin and, let's say, contribution margin is so big for so many customers. Sorry, I keep calling them customers, but for so many business owners, what's often going on there is people are not factoring in all of the soft costs, and we'll just say not direct materials costs or direct labor costs, particularly with the audience that you're reaching out to, and not understanding that gross margin or gross profit, which maybe is just sales minus direct labor, if you're calculating direct labor effectively, and direct materials, if you're capturing that, and contribution margin, which should include all direct costs, whether it's soft costs, subcontractor costs, labor that is, in many cases, not accurately allocated by project. There can be a very wide swing there. And if you're pricing jobs just based on gross profit or gross margin, you're probably underpricing by a wide margin. And that might have a lot to do with your poor profitability.
Very interesting. So I think the question that you were reaching for there is, what's one thing that our audience thinks that they understand that they might be getting wrong? If I asked you that question and you had to summarize what you just said into something of a sound bite for my audience, how would you summarize that?
Well, when I was prepping for this question, I wanted to explain that profit does not equal revenue. But in this case, I think what a lot of people don't understand that they think they do is they don't really understand their costs and ultimately their margin structure. And I think that is what I'm going to answer this question with right now, which is so many people in the trades started in the trades and now they own their own company. And what they're not is they're not an accountant. They're not a Wharton trained finance wonk. They're a plumber by trade, or a framing guy, or, electrician. And not that you can't be really, really good with the books and swift with financing and Excel and all that, but there's a large share of people who fit that, background who are not real strong with that. And so what's often happening is they're not truly understanding their costs and margins. And then often they're not quoting jobs properly. They're not tracking jobs properly in terms of really keeping a close eye on profitability. And if I were to go even one layer deeper than that, another thing where a lot of tears are shed is most bookkeepers and most CPAs are not in the business of organizing your books so that it's easier for you to understand what's going on. And they're not in the business of explaining it to you in a way that makes it easy.
I think a lot of my audience can probably attest to that.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were talking to one of these business owners that was a former technician, came up in the trades, they turned wrenches for a living, and they said, hey, I'm going to hang my own shingle. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to do this myself because I can, and I will. Obviously, most likely, they're never going to be that expert finance person. Mm-hmm. How much do they have to know to be successful?
There's a lot of ways to describe that. And almost going back to what I said before, the first thing is somebody who's working with them needs to work with someone else who's producing those financials to shift how those financials are presented. Not to shill our stuff, but it's such a problem. We actually have a group consulting program where we work with the CEO and their bookkeeper or accounting person. And the first thing we do is just help them simplify those financials so they're easy to understand. And so once you've got that, and then with even not a ton of training, but a little bit of training to realize what you need to look at on those simplified financials, it allows a business owner to really get a handle on what's going on there. So again, it's twofold. You need data that's easy to understand, or reports that are formatted to make it easy. And then you need some training. You don't need to be, you don't need to be an MBA or Ivy League econ guy to figure that out. But if you don't have a handle on your costs, how are you going to be profitable?
It's a good question. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how what you do then. So,
Yeah.
if you were to go into a company, what are the first three things that you would check to see whether or not they were above average, average, or below average, and in needed dire help?
Yeah. Well, the first thing we offer in many cases is for free. Send us an email, tell us what your industry is, or more specifically, your NAICS code. It's like an SIC code. And then, share a little bit about, your revenue and profitability percentages. And we can share with you what percentile basically you're at in terms of profitability in that industry. Oh, in the size range, because there's different profitability bands, by revenue size or by size band. But first, we want to get a sense of where you are. Part of our onboarding process is to evaluate where people are in the profitability, stack. Bottom quartile, second from the bottom, third, top quartile, et cetera. So we want to know where they are and what the problem is. If you're crushing it on profitability, I don't know that we need to help you with that. Yay. So that's a big one. Like, where are you in terms of profitability? We also like to look at people's books because I think I shared with you, some people are looking at, let's say, a profit and loss or an income statement that's really hard to understand and doesn't have a lot of contextual information in it, which makes it really hard to understand because it's complicated. And when I see people and I'm like, share with me what you look at every month. And they say, well, we don't have anything. Well, already they're like at the bottom of the stack in terms of sophistication. Or they send me some stuff that they're getting on a regular basis, but I can tell right away that that is going to be really hard to understand. And then all the way at the top of the spectrum, it's simplified. It's got some base context in it. A guy who's not even in their business on a regular basis can get a pretty clear picture right away on the health of that business over the last couple of years, for example. And then, we do an interview like, hey, what's going on? What's keeping you up at night? What are your problems? And, it ranges from my partner, my cash flow, growth, too busy, not enough time. And so, we devise essentially a custom prescription from the Profit Doctor based on what their problems are.
Awesome. And simplified or not, what are the things that these business owners should know about their numbers? Like, are there things that you teach that are like non-negotiables? Like, hey, you need to know these 5 things regardless of anything else, or these 3 things, or whatever.
Well, first off, you don't need to know every number on your P&L. But if I ask somebody who's coming into my like intake or checkup or whatnot, and I say, over the last couple of years, what's your revenue and profitability? Like, you should know those numbers. Where if you're not looking at your financials monthly, you're missing it. If you don't have a general understanding on month by month, what's your revenue, what's your profitability percentile, and what's your cash flow, you're missing something. Those would be some of the most basic things. And then the layer beneath that is to really understand, what are the, let's say, 3 big levers in your business that are driving your business. An obvious one might be around collections. How long is it taking you to collect money? That would be a good one. Another one might be, for every dollar you bill customers, what percentage of that is going to labor or materials? Those would be some examples. But if you don't know, pretty much like the back of your hand, what your revenue number looks like, what your net profitability number looks like, a little bit about your costs, and the 2 or 3 levers that drive those things, you're not managing with the numbers, you're managing with something else.
Fair enough. So when I think about company financials, 3 reports come to mind. The P&L, balance sheet, and a cash flow statement. Just high level. So we kind of understand what a P&L is, profit and loss. I think my audience probably has an idea, even if they don't know exactly how to read one, what it is.
Yep.
What is a balance sheet, and what important information does that convey?
Yeah. Well, some of the biggest things you might find on your balance sheet are how much money you owe other people. Good to keep track of. I see some businesses where they think they're doing well, but every year they're piling up more and more debt. That's not a company necessarily that's doing well. I had a client recently where they were an older fella. He was kind of counting on this business to ultimately be his retirement parachute, if you will. But every year, their debt picture was getting worse and worse. That's not a business that's going to help him retire, right? You can't sell a business that owes more than it's worth for anything. So that's a big one. I'm thinking two or three other things, and they're probably going to come back to me. But a preview of coming attractions, maybe you're going to ask about the statement of cash flow. What I would say is, at a high level, that is the accounting statement that reconciles profit with cash. And if you're looking for a blind spot that many business owners have, they often think that profit equals cash. And they often find that that's very much not the case. So a good example of that is, let's say last month we made on our P&L, $100,000 more than we spent. So let's say our net profit was $100,000 last month. But if the amount of money people owe you went up by $50,000, your cash only increased by 50 instead of 100, because half of that is now in, let's say, accounts receivable. So looking at the cash flow statement is a good way to understand where all the money went that you thought you made.
That's a really good description. I talk to a lot of business owners, and I think the cash flow statement is probably the one that confuses people the most. I don't want to speak for anybody in my audience, but just a general observation, and it's difficult to simplify that. I think at least I've found that it's easy to explain, but it's hard to understand. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah.
So if there's any way or tips or tricks that you could help my audience and me take away and understand, like, how to see a cash flow statement when I'm looking at it. Does that question make sense?
It does.
Okay.
I wish I had a whiteboard and I'd just go right to it. And what I will say is, it also draws on a question you had asked me earlier. How much do people need to know? When I have a course, I think I shared, it's called the Profit CFO, and I share with people what, accounting and finance type tools and information they need to know to improve their profitability. I tell them, this is not accounting 101. I'm not trying to teach you accounting. I want to show you, as the CEO of, let's say, a $2 to $50 million size business, what do you need to know to be effective as a CEO when it comes to, what you need to know to be effective as a CEO that would fall under that CFO style umbrella, or finance and accounting and et cetera. So you don't need to know everything, but you do need to know a few things, and we'll just talk about from the cash flow statement. What trips people up is, first of all, they don't know the purpose of the cash flow statement. And I would just say the most simplistic purpose is, if you look at last month's net profitability and you wonder, why did my bank account not go up by that amount of money? That's what the cash flow statement tells you. And every line item in the cash flow statement is telling you why it did or didn't go up by that amount of money. So usually the top line of a cash flow statement is net proceeds from operating. That's like your profit number, and that should be the same as your net profit, basically, from the period, right? And then sometimes it throws people off, because if your debt goes up, that means the amount of cash you have went down, right? If you owe people more, if more people owe you money, that's cash you don't have. If you owe people more money, ironically, that's more cash that you have. And so if you start with, last month I made 100,000, and then I owe the credit card company another 10,000, it's like I have 10,000 more in cash. But if all my customers owe me another 50,000, That's 50,000 in cash that I don't have. So if you start with, I should have got X amount more cash from my operations, like profit, and then every line item in that cash flow statement is why you did or didn't get that much extra money. And it does trip people up because it's kind of backwards. When you owe someone more money, it's like you took a loan from them, and so you have more cash. And when someone owes you money, they took a loan from you. And if you're in the construction space or the trades, generally speaking, people are taking a loan from you, and that's costing you cash.
That's a good explanation. I appreciate that. So that begs the question, can somebody have good cash flow but poor profitability?
Yeah, just take out a lot of debt.
And what about the opposite? Can somebody be very profitable and have very little cash flow?
Sure can. I mean, here'd be a good example. Let's say you're not very good at collecting on your invoices. I can't imagine anybody who listens to you doesn't have some problem customers who owe them money, GC, and hasn't paid you in a long time. Well, now all of a sudden your P&L might look good, but you don't have any money in the bank. And that would be an example of your cash flow statement looking poor or your cash flow looking poor.
Yeah. It seems to me that could be a pitfall for people who don't know how to understand cash flow statements or profitability for that matter, because they may think they're profitable, but wonder why they have no money.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm curious, and I want to talk a little bit more on maybe some of the things that can be done in that specific example. Before I get there, I want to ask a specific question. I don't know if I can get this specific enough because I know this is going to vary widely depending on industry and depending on the size of business. But let's say you have an HVAC company that's doing less than $5 million a year. Is there one thing profitability-wise that you would point to that if you make one change or do one thing differently that you get the most benefit from? Is there a blanket?
Yeah. Well, I've got my number one tool for pretty much everybody who's not super profitable. And in the spirit of boiling it down to something that even a guy who didn't graduate high school and has been hammering nails and is like, show me some wise business stuff that's going to really make a difference. Stop doing the things that don't work. So I get it. There are things that might not be working in your business that arguably do need to be fixed. But there's likely a lot of things in your business that are not working that instead of continuing to do or continuing to try to fix, you should stop doing and get them out of your business. And I'll just make up an example here. Let's say you're a builder and you build houses for people. And there's 3 types of houses that you build. Let's say there's low-cost houses, middle-cost houses, and expensive houses. And let's just pretend when it comes to low-cost houses, you keep losing money because you can't get cheap enough to hit the price point and whatever, you're losing money. And let's just pretend for high-cost houses, even though everybody thinks they want to be at the top end of the market, let's pretend the way you guys do things just doesn't work. You have to go back and rework and rework and rework because your crews paint B+ level. And when you're painting a $16 million home, if it's not 100% perfect, you're back out there redoing it. I'm just making up an example, right? Kind of Goldilocks, right? Too cold, too hot, just right. But let's pretend in that example that you should probably stop doing low-cost homes and high-cost homes and, stick to the knitting of what you're good at. And that's just sort of one example, right? Of don't do things that, don't do the things that are costing you money, right? Especially over and over and over again.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yep.
You have a program called the 5 Points of Profit. Is that right?
I have 4 key points that will help you get 5 additional percentile points of profitability.
Oh, so thank you for clarifying.
I've kind of got that, probably my fault. But the 5 points of profit, we offer a course, it's a group consulting program where people get 5 points of profitability, but it's not 5 smart things, those kind of points. It's literally if your net profitability is 3%, we will help you get up to 8% net profitability. In that example, I don't know, it's like 160% improvement. But basically, that works out to an additional $50,000 of net profitability or income for you as the owner for every $1 million of revenue per year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is that something, you said you have 4 things, is that something you can talk about here on the podcast?
So glad you asked, John. But sorry, Josh. But wait, there's more. The first one, I think, really ties into, I think, a cornerstone of what you talk about on your podcast, which is the mindset or the psychology of the owner. What I see so often is owners are so dang busy and so focused on operations and revenue, call that 150% of their bandwidth, that they are devoting very little percent, if you will, of their bandwidth or the hours in their calendar to specific things that improve profitability. We call that profit psychology. You could call it mindset, but basically what's going on between the ears of the owner is our number one thing. And if you don't get that right, generally speaking, people don't take action on the other things. The second area is something I've already alluded to, which is to stop doing the things that don't work. We have a whole program or course, if you will, on that we call the Profit Accelerator. And we promise people 5 more points of net profitability or 50,000 in net profit dollars per million in revenue within 90 days. So it's pretty freaking awesome, honestly. And what we show people is how to stop doing the things across a number of different areas of their business that are costing them money. You can imagine if you're doing something that makes you lose money, if you stop doing that, you're making more money. The third area is that profit CFO area that I mentioned, which is to understand your numbers, manage through the numbers, simplify your financials, and pull some financial levers. A good example, which we already alluded to, was collections or accounts receivable. Many, many people in the trades, maybe worst of all, where a lot of other customers owe them money, that is killing their cash flow. And by making adjustments to that, which doesn't really increase your profitability, but has a huge impact on cash flow. So that's kind of the third part of this 4-part profit prescription. And then the fourth part is what we call profit growth, which is the opposite of do less of what doesn't work, is do more of what works best. And so those are the 4 parts to our prescription.
Which one of these parts do you find the most resistance in by owners, and what do you do to help them get over it?
Yeah, probably number one, the profit psychology. I would just say everybody out there who is below average profitability and hasn't emailed support@profitdoctor.com either never heard of us, which is probably most of you, or hasn't gotten over the idea that A, they don't have a problem, or B, they can figure it out themselves. I think what happens so much is the people who work their way up, the thing they've often got in spades is work ethic. And I guess good news, bad news. The tragedy is working harder, trying to fix a profit problem by improving operations and getting more revenue. It just doesn't work. The good news is once you get over that blind spot or mental block and realize there's some very straightforward things that can be done to improve profitability. Heck, you can just ask, what are the 5 best ways to improve profitability to ChatGPT and insert 5 sentences on your business. If you're not doing that, you haven't gotten over this blind spot that working harder is going to improve your profitability. But the good news is once you get over it, like I said, we have this program, 90 days, an extra 5% of net profitability is often life-changing for any business owner who's on the bottom half of the stack.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I read somewhere, I don't remember if it was an article I read or if it was on the website, you refer to something called a mix problem. Does that sound familiar? When I believe it was relating to price increases.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is this. Maybe this goes right back to that fictitious example of high, medium, and low end houses as a builder, right?
Mm.
So let's say you were in fact actually okay at delivering all three of those, right? It would be highly likely that unless you're building those low end homes in bulk, there's less margin in those low end homes is very common, right? So by shifting the mix of what you sell to, let's say, mid and high end homes in that example, that would likely improve your profitability. Or here would be a good example. You said HVAC. I know just enough to be dangerous. My understanding is that a lot of times they want to sell you a maintenance program or a service call with the idea that they will become your go-to provider, for a new AC install when your AC breaks. Not that any ACs ever break in Arizona, but
Never.
often for many companies that truck roll to fix your AC is quote a loss leader or break even, right? And then the $6,000 here's a new AC is theoretically where they make their money, right? Well, you could imagine that if you can shift the mix of various things that you do, you could be a lot more profitable. And let's pretend that a service plan makes you some money, and a service call loses you some money, and a new install you make a lot of money. That's a little bit of a weird example in that case, because how do you get the new installs if you don't do the other two? But let's pretend that there's you could fix an AC problem by recharging it or replacing it. Chances are the recharges you don't make a lot of money, and the installs you do. That might be a mixed shift to get people into more premium. Another thing is if you think good, better, best, oftentimes good is not where you make your money. Better is, and best is even more so. And I'm just going to take a guess. I saw you've got some training for technicians on your website. I bet one of the things you're trying to train them is some combination of the upsell from good to better or better to best, or the add-on, would you like fries with that? And those would be examples of things like mix shift might make a big difference to a company's profitability.
That's interesting. So I try to stay away from that kind of stuff in my courses.
Okay.
But I kind of this sparks another question of mine, specifically, because you mentioned, or we're talking right now about the HVAC space, and we see this a lot in residential. It's creeping into commercial every, just a little bit, but fixed pricing versus time and material.
Yep.
This is a conversation that we've had in my organization multiple times, and it's been a conversation throughout the industry. I sit on some industry association boards and things like that. Help me understand if one is better than the other, or if it's just a matter of how you run your business.
Yeah. I kind of want to lean to it matters on how you run your business. And it's almost like, a good comedian, like they tease something and they make a joke about it at the end. I guess that's how you're supposed to do it. But, we teased in the beginning about this idea that so many business owners don't fully understand their cost structure. Okay. If you are doing time and materials, it tends to protect you from not understanding your cost structure. If you are doing fixed price and you don't understand your cost structure, it's highly likely you're losing your shirt. So I don't want to say that one's better than the other, but time and materials tends to be, like if you go bowling and they put the kiddie bumpers in, you got a little bit more guardrails on you to not lose your shirt on that. But still, in many cases, there's a lot of other soft costs that you might be eating if you're not understanding your cost structure. So I don't want to just say fixed versus whatever, but
Sure.
If you have fixed pricing and you don't really understand your costs and you have a lot of variability, my guess is you're losing out because A, you're just not doing it right to begin with, and B, ultimately, the people who take you up on that offer are the ones you're going to lose money on. Right. So let's just pretend that you promise we'll do. I can't come up with it. We'll evaluate all your plumbing for $1,000. Okay. If I just bought a brand new house and evaluating my plumbing is easy, I'm like, I'm not spending $1,000 on something like that. And if I live in a 1908 Craftsman with what is that stuff, lath and plaster and all that crap, it's like, you'll check out my plumbing for $1,000. You're going to be here for 2 weeks, So you often, and that kind of gets into pricing. When you offer sales and promotions or fixed price things that you haven't like qualified who can get it, often the people who are drawn to you are low end buyers, price shoppers, etc., who are often the least valuable customers to have. It's like when you offer something for free, you got to be very careful that the people you don't draw in are, we'll call it the bottom of your market or the least profitable segment of your market.
That's interesting. I wonder, I hadn't really thought about it that way, about creating the guardrails.
Yep.
I think that's a really good way to look at it. I wonder if in the right context, if you know your numbers and how well you know your numbers, if fixed cost has a higher upside. And I only ask that because I wonder to myself why a fast food restaurant like McDonald's would offer a number one instead of having you buy a hamburger, a French fry, and a Coke. You know what I mean?
Well, boy, that's like four threads in one. I'm afraid that I'm going to go down 6 rat holes. I think that what McDonald's is trying to do is they're trying to package stuff up to, give you maybe a good, better, best ladder to sell you up. They're trying to make it easy for people who don't like to choose. They're giving you like a package offer plus a la carte. They're doing a lot of things, or you might imagine that, let's just pretend McDonald's has hired dozens of super sharp financial guys and gals to figure out a bunch of stuff on their pricing and menu. I mean, they probably, we'll just say McDonald's in its history might have spent $100 million or more evaluating their pricing models. They're going to be able to put way more money on that than, the average $3 million a year, plumbing services contract company, right? Or 30 million or even 300 million. But we covered a lot of territory there. I think generally a lot of consumer type customers, residential, let's just say, they are often going to like a flat fee because there's, quote, less risk in there for them. So often that is going to appeal to them. It might be easier to sell. And so to that extent, if you're doing okay financially, it might draw customers to you. So that might be the upside of that.
Okay, good. I like the way you explained that. Thank you. It made it easier for me to understand.
Yeah.
So no, that's great. So let's shift the conversation a little bit to the cash conversation. I'm curious, when you go into a business, when you look at the AR, what kind of cadence or terms or collections behavior do you look for to find opportunity there?
It's a big area. Let me think of like a great. The first one is, do you have a game plan? So I'll just throw it out here this way. The average high school football team probably has a better playbook or game plan than your business on collecting money. Theoretically, you could do better than those guys, huh? So do you track your collections effectiveness? Do you have a game plan when people are late? Have you already identified who is or isn't late? We have a whole program on that. We actually have a whole module, again, in that Profit CFO course. Another big thing that maybe ties back to a question you asked or maybe are about to ask, what is something that people don't know or a big blind spot? This whole idea about payment terms, if you are charging people net 30 because you just think that's how it's done, you miss the big secret. The big secret is all that crap is made up. You could have come up with anything. You could have said net zero. You could have said 100% in advance. You could have said 50% in order to book the slot on my calendar, and then 50% upon completion. So all that stuff is made up. I get a lot of clients who come to me whose accounts receivables, collections, cash flow situation is crap And part of it is they're just assuming that net 30 is like what they have to do. Like Uncle Sam told the IRS net 30 is how it is, and that they're going to get in trouble if they do something else. That stuff just all made up. I have a sliding glass door in my kitchen that was all messed up, and I needed a guy to replace the track. I was so impressed. The first thing he said was, I need a credit card to book a time, half now to order the materials, and then I'll bill you the other half on the same credit card the day my guy shows up. The guy might just be, quote, replacing sliding glass door tracks, but that guy has his AR tight. He has a positive cash conversion cycle. He's making money before he shows up. How are you doing it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm so glad that you went down that road, because so many of my listeners are in the commercial space, mm-hmm. and they extend terms,
yep.
and including myself. And yep. And this is a conversation we have a lot within my own company about kind of the same thing that you said. Like, is this narrative that we've been telling ourselves, this story that we've been repeating for 15 years, is it real? Right? And ultimately what we landed on is no. All you have to do is ask for something else. We tend to, especially in the space that I'm in, we tend to think, well, all the other companies are doing it, and if I don't do it, I'm going to be at a disadvantage. When really, it's different than the positioning of your business. It's different than your offer, right? That's the mechanics, at least in my mind. It's different than your offer to the customer, right? That's not what makes you valuable when you get paid. What makes you valuable is the quality of product you deliver. And so I'm really glad that you went down that road, about the net 30. So let's pretend that a company does extend terms, and oftentimes you've seen this, I'm sure, in commercial spaces. You've got the net 15, net 30, net 45, net 60, all the way up to 90, sometimes even 120 with government contracts and stuff, although it's fewer and further between. What is a healthy, if you have to be on terms, which we've already established you don't, but if a company is going to be on terms, what's a healthy ratio of, say, under 30 compared to over 30 days old?
I don't know that I can answer the question the way you framed it. I don't know that there's health. I'm going to answer it in a little bit of a different way. And the first thing, the first part of your question, or the setup, just makes me think. You said, hey, do you have to offer terms? And it doesn't necessarily have to or it's not really coupled to what you offer. And I guess I would disagree with that a little bit. There's a thing called a Venn diagram. You've seen them even if you don't know what the name is. And it's like a circle, and then another circle and another circle, and you're trying to get the part that's in the middle between all the circles. So if you think who you sell to, that's like one circle. And if you then think what you sell to them, or the positioning of your offer, high end, low end, high service, high quality, ACs versus plumbing, I don't know, something like that. And then you might say your payment terms. You've got to be in the middle where all that stuff meets up. For example, if you're going to say, we're only going to do work where people pay in advance, but we sell to the federal government, it's not clear to me that you're going to have a business. Right? Because I don't know that those two circles have any overlap. Okay. Now, if you sell to consumers, there are a lot of consumers who will pay something in advance. Hey, I need your credit card to send a guy out to, check the leak at your septic tank. And it's a $250 deposit. I mean, I think a lot of people would give you their credit card. They're expecting that, right? But Uncle Sam is not writing you a check before you show up, as far as I'm aware, but maybe you got to figure it out.
No.
So what I would say is you got to make sure that what you're selling and who you're selling it and maybe how you're selling it, somewhere in the middle there, like where those circles all meet up, that's probably where you want to be. Because if your circles don't meet and you're not there, you got a big problem. Yeah.
That's a good way of looking at it. I appreciate the rephrasing of the question and delivering that answer. I think that's easier to understand for the audience. So thank you.
That being said, I would just maybe touch on your question again as I'm thinking about it a little more deeply. Let's say you're on net 30, right? That's your standard approach. And then you look at what you're getting, or you just look over the last year, let's just say 1/3 of your customers end up paying you net 90, 1/3 pay on time, and I don't know, 1/3, let's say, are net 45, right? You might, in the spirit of stop doing what doesn't work or stop doing what's costing you money. I already forgot what the first bucket was, but if that first bucket was net 90, you might look backwards and say, people who pay us net 90 are not people we're going to do business with, right? That's another way to look at it. But I would say you probably want to manage to get the bulk of how you get paid on the terms that you set up, and you need to manage that proactively. Like if you think you have a good customer who always pays 60 days late, you probably either need to charge them more, fire them, come to Jesus. I don't know. There's a lot of ways to handle that.
No, that's great. I appreciate you elaborating on that. So in the spirit of stopping the things that aren't serving you, basically, stop the things you don't do well. Let's say you have a portfolio of customers, okay? Half of them give you a 60% gross margin, let's just say. And then the other half, for simplistic sake, gives you a 20% gross margin. And there's no way that you can capture more gross margin from that.
Yep.
Are you better off firing the customers that aren't as profitable?
Yeah, great question. I'd start with, when you look at your cost picture and you said this group is 20% and this group is 60%, number one, are you right? / are you sure? And then maybe even a little bit more nuanced, is that gross margin or net margin? Honestly, gross margin doesn't impress me or interest me all that much, because it's not until you get through what it's really costing you that it really matters, right? But a classic case study from my business school was, we've got this old line manufacturing company, and let's say their net margin on this thing that they've been doing forever, is 20%, right? And now they've got this new high-tech darling that looks like 60%. What should they focus their energy on? And it's like, well, we're doing $250 million worth of business on this 20 margin and $1 million on the 60%. You probably need to win on that thing that's like 95% of your revenue, right? And often what'll happen is that thing that's really high margin is only high margin because it requires your best tech and you as the owner to go sell it. And when you layer in that extra expense overhead, that thing that you thought was 60 gross margin and so much better is actually lower margin, because it's a big squeaky wheel, than that thing that's Main Street. Now, on the flip side, if you have a chunk of your portfolio that is low margin and really isn't as good as this other chunk, there is a legitimate, it's a contender that you want to start either phasing out that low margin stuff, increasing your mix or your percentage of, business in that higher margin. And both of those are schools of thought, right? Sometimes what seems like lower margin isn't. And then sometimes what seems like low margin really is a dog in your business and should be kind of reduced or eliminated. I just don't want to say it doesn't depend, because it does depend on a little bit more than, at first glance, one looks high margin and one looks low margin. I mean, at first glance, let's get more high margin, sure. But you got to, at least go a couple layers deeper.
Makes sense, especially when you bring in the volume conversation, right? That paints a pretty clear picture. And what I'm hearing you say, and correct me if I'm wrong in this, but in that scenario, you're better off looking at margin dollars versus margin percent, right? Because if the margin dollars are going to be more than, that's what moves the needle at the end of the day, right?
I would say you need to do both. I think that's a very good distinction. Percentages versus absolute numbers, right? So something that's tiny but has a great percentage, it might trick you into thinking it's so special, right?
Sure.
So I think it's both. And again, I hate to give people the "it depends" answer, but there's a little bit more nuance than that, just first layer to that onion.
Okay. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So let's move the conversation forward again. I've got so now is a good time to pause and just kind of ask you how you got here. I'm super curious now after having this conversation and understanding where your expertise is, even though you were hesitant to even use the word expertise. It's clear, right? How did you get here? How did you accumulate the knowledge that you have, on profitability and numbers? Like, why should we listen to you, Ben?
Yeah, there you go. So, I've always been sort of a numbers oriented and make money kind of person. I mean, honestly, I was the treasurer of my third grade fundraising thing. I think it's like a lemonade stand or some BS like that. And I guess I've always just been wired that way. And I think I've always been wired not just revenue, but profitability focused. And so I think it's always come naturally to me. I've been in a number of startups. I've worked at Dell. I worked at Microsoft. So like, Fortune 100 kind of companies as well as startups, by education, economics undergraduate and an MBA. And I've taken a lot of pricing, like university courses on pricing. And actually, when I was at Microsoft, I spent a couple years focusing very specifically around their pricing of their software products. And what I took away from that is that pricing is probably one of the most important levers that drives profitability. But maybe even more so, it fed my love and enthusiasm and focus on profitability as a very distinct set of tools and thinking from just revenue. One of the things that I would hope everybody takes away from this podcast is that profitability does not equal revenue. Those, I don't want to say they're 100% independent of each other, because that's not the case. But there are $100 million a year companies that are losing their shirt. And there's 1 million a year companies where those CEOs are making, $550,000 salaries, right? You want to be real clear, because the toolkit for each side of that equation are very, very different. And then why to listen to me? I am so proud of some of our clients. I had a client, this year for 20 years, they've been running their business, basically making essentially no profit. And in the first 8 months of this year, they took their profitability up by 20 points. So again, it's not 20 things to do. It's another $200,000 of net profitability in this business owner's pocket at the end of the year per million in revenue. That is like huge. And I kind of like collecting 20-point turnaround stories. That's like those shows on TV, like your house makeover. You go there and it like looks like a pigsty and it's falling apart. And then it's like a mansion 2 months later or 2 weeks later when they come back from Aruba on a vacation you paid for or whatever. But this is like you're killing yourself for years in a business that's just racking up debt and paying you very little, to like, holy moly, this business is now a top quartile earner, right? And it's just a life-changing experience for people. So why listen to me? We guarantee our results. It's quick, and you get your money back if it doesn't work.
Fair enough. All right, I got another question for you. So it's one I like to ask a lot of the guests that come on the show. But what, Ben, is a truth that took you years to fully understand, but changed everything once you finally did?
Yeah, I kind of alluded to it, and I hate to plow the same ground, but it's so important, is profit does not equal revenue. I started a business. Actually, this is kind of goes back to the question you just asked. Where did I learn some of this stuff? I started my own consulting and staffing firm back in 2007. And that business grew roughly 40% a year over year, for about 7 or 8 years. We were awarded by Inc. magazine 5 years in a row as one of the fastest growing companies in the United States, privately held companies. And through that time, the first few years, I was very focused on profitability. I was sticking to the knitting. We were highly, highly profitable, basically netting about $1 million a year for yours truly, times were good. And then it occurred to me, man, my main customer wants to work with larger subcontractors, me. So I went on a big growth focus. And what happened is, as I was growing the top line, I was not growing the bottom line. And while I knew that that was coming because I was investing in growth, 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 what was happening is I was getting sloppier in how I was doing things. I was not tracking profitability as closely. And with that brought so many other problems and headaches. So we have a name for it in the Profit Doctor. We call it profititis. That's when you have strong revenue and revenue growth, like millions of dollars of top line revenue, but poor, flagging, flat bottom line profitability. We call that profititis. And that is a big thing to watch out for, because when your business gets larger, but your profitability percentage and absolute dollars are not keeping up with it, your business is ultimately getting weaker, more frail, more things can go wrong, and almost always it's sucking the life out of you as the owner and draining your gas tank. And that becomes a very, very perilous place to be. When you own a business that is not very profitable, gas is draining out of your personal gas tank and often your checking account. And it's very difficult to stay in that position for a long period of time. It's very dangerous.
That resonates a lot with me and my journey. Just in full transparency. So we've been on the Inc. 5000 list 3 times, not 5. We couldn't get past that 4th year, but there was a point in my business as I was growing it, similar to you, right, where I kept growing the top line. When we reached about $12 million, we paused, kind of looked at the profitability and what it was when we were at 9, 10, even $11 million, and it wasn't trending in the direction that we wanted it to go. So had to make some changes, hard changes, right? What do they say? That revenue is vanity, profit is sanity.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so once we made those changes, revenue went back down to about $10 million, but we were almost twice as profitable as we were at $12 million. And that was the first taste of profititis that I got. And the difference between me and you there is I was completely blind. I didn't have the awareness that you do, right? And so I didn't see that happening until it had already happened. And then so that was quite a I want to say an ego hit, right? Sure. But a learning experience, right? And I'm glad I went through that because it taught me a lot about profitability, revenue, business in general, but it just goes to show how easily these things can be mistook and misunderstood, playing exactly to your point, right? That if you don't have a close eye on this kind of stuff, sooner or later you could have all the revenue in the world, but nothing to show for it.
Sure.
It's a scary thing.
Yeah, it is a very dangerous place to be, because as the company gets weaker and weaker, first of all, when you get more and more zeros behind that revenue number, it's easier to have your problems are bigger, the amount of money necessary to fix things goes up. And then if the amount of resources you have available in terms of cash flow, net profitability, backstop, things like that, then, it starts to topple over.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I guess Biggie was right. More money, more problems, right?
There you go.
All right. So you mentioned pricing, and this is a little intriguing to me because I know that in my space specifically, and a lot of my listeners have asked me this question in particular. How do I price my services? Right. A lot of my listeners are in the service business, home and commercial. And there's always this question surrounding, how do I properly price my services? Do I just call around and see what other people are charging and then kind of fall somewhere in the middle, not too high, not too low? Or are there specific things within my business that I can use to determine how to price my service?
Yeah. There are bookshelves and bookcases of thinking about pricing. So I'm not sure that I can just say, you should do this. But I'm going to do it anyway. almost all of you guys probably should just raise your prices. So if I think back over the last 5 years, probably everybody in the trades has experienced an explosion in materials and labor costs. And
Mm-hmm.
in many cases, people have not increased their prices even to account for that inflation in materials and labor cost. So if I were going to break every rule and just say, tell them one thing, I'd say you should probably raise your price. The more nuanced answer is, remember when we did the circles of like how you should do your terms, right? So if here's the customers and here is what you sell and your positioning, like are you a premium provider or a cost, low cost provider, et cetera, your pricing needs to then match that. It would not make that much sense, for example, to sell to people who are budget shoppers, to sell a budget product or service and then have premium pricing. It's not clear to me that that's a winning formula. At the same time, if you're selling to premium buyers a premium product and you're underpriced, you're likely leaving a lot of money on the table. So again, I would say that your pricing needs to, it needs to match up with who you're selling to and what it is you're selling in the sense of the positioning you have in the market. So, if your guys show up, white glove, where everybody else is, tracking dirt on the carpet, you're probably paying that tech a higher price. You're, maybe using better materials and taking longer on the job site. You can't just price in the middle and still be that profitable, most likely, right? In that case, you're selling yourself as a premium offer. You probably are going to need to match that with a premium price. Now, not always. I'm not saying, never say never. But if your cost picture is quite a bit higher, and hopefully your value is going higher as well for a specific market segment, your price is probably going to want to also elevate to kind of match what you're doing there.
I suppose that makes sense. No, I appreciate that context. So tell me, has there ever been a circumstance, Ben, that you had to unlearn something that you thought you knew? And I know we had talked about the profitability doesn't equal revenue. But
Yep.
You briefly explained to me your journey. You've worked for some big name organizations. You've been involved in the consulting world, an entrepreneur, your own business. I mean, has there been one thing in particular that you can think of that you had to say, shit, maybe it's not this way?
Yeah. In the spirit of things that mistakes that really cost you a lot are the ones you really learn. I shared
Yeah.
with you that example that we were growing top line while bottom line was staying relatively flat. And so intellectually, my calculator brain, I felt like I was making that decision intentionally because I felt in order to maintain my relationship with my core customers, I needed to have a larger footprint. But what I didn't fully appreciate, and I'm not sure that I unlearned something, but I learned something that was a big blind spot for me, is the importance of my own, we'll just call it emotional gas tank. So as we started adding business that wasn't very profitable and adding people where we were not getting a return on investment and not, if you will, cutting those parts of the business that weren't working well, I had more problems. And while there was a direct financial cost to that resulted in sort of a flat profitability percentage, declining percentage, but flat dollar amount, what I didn't really appreciate is how much it was just sucking the joy out of my soul, and showing up at work was harder and harder and less fun and less fun. And so what I would say to all you business owners out there is probably the most dangerous thing is when the joy is leaking out of your personal gas tank and you're not taking steps to, patch that gas tank and refill it, because eventually you're going to show up burnt out. And if when you are full of energy and enthusiasm, you can break through walls and nothing will stop you, I think the opposite is also true. When you are running ragged and burnt out, like every mountain or every molehill is a mountain, and you're going to get run over by a truck because you're not going to be able to get out of the way.
Yeah. Powerful words, man. All right, we're going to move to close here pretty soon. Just a couple more questions for you. What's the most important thing that we haven't talked about today?
So glad you asked. I've been waiting to squeeze this one in there. Thanks for listening this whole time. My number one action tip for you, if you will, or technique, we talked about stop doing what isn't working. Now let me pair that high-level piece of advice with a very tactical piece of how to. On the bookshelf behind me, maybe you can read it, I don't know. There's a book called the 80-20 rule. A lot of people have heard of that concept or the Pareto principle. The idea is that often you get 80% of the good stuff from only 20% of your highest performers. So like if you're in the B2B space, chances are your top 20% of clients are responsible for 80% of your revenue and likely 80% of your profitability or contribution margin dollars. What I like to do is flip that upside down. If your best 20% are giving you 80% of the good stuff, what are your worst 20% doing to your business? And the short answer is a lot of bad stuff. So almost always they are contributing very, very little to the positive part of your business. And they are 80% of the problems, the squeaky wheels, the pain in the butt that is dragging your team down in terms of morale and sucking up their time. Often they are the money losers. They are the things that are sucking up the gas out of your emotional gas tank. And I'll just give you an example or two. I was recently working with a couple of business owners, B2B. Their customer count was about 360, magically happened to be the same for both of them, which is why I think of it. The top 10% of their clients were 90% of their revenue and presumably 90% of their contribution margin as well. Their bottom 20% of customers was about 0.5% of their revenue. So if they just stopped servicing those bottom 80 clients, they probably wouldn't have even noticed that there was a blip on their revenue. But where was the biggest pain in the butt coming from? The collection notices, the AR stuff, the weird corner case. Could you do this thing that's really hard? Blah, blah, blah. All the problems. And so by stepping further and further away from servicing those guys or not servicing them, they could improve their business. Okay, what is the 50-20 rule? What I invite my clients to do is to go chunk by chunk through their business. Come to our website. We have a free profit leaks detection worksheet, which you could get and shows you of the areas of your business, where should you focus on first? And then you apply the 50-20 rule there, which is a Profit Doctor original. And what it says is to cut half of the worst 20% in these low performing areas in the next 30 days. Why 50-20? We know that, let's say your low performing area is customers. Let's say you have 100 customers and you know you've got a lot of bad ones. Let's say there's 20, your worst 20%. And let's say a handful of them you really can't quote fire, right? They also happen to be a famous podcaster in your industry. And if you fire them, they're going to poison the well, so to speak. So don't cut all 20 in the next 30 days. It's like it's going to give you a heart attack. But of those bottom 20, there's probably 10 that you could just not renew, right? So that's why you don't have to get rid of all the bottom ones right away, but get rid of half of the worst ones as quickly as possible. And you will be amazed how much money comes back to your company, how much time is restored into your calendar, as well as the people have to service those really hard to service customers, and how much it juices up your gas tank when you're no longer dealing with, Mr. or Mrs. Smith or ABC Corp, who's never satisfied, always calling you back, dragging your company down in the press, etc.
Awesome. So glad I asked. What other books back there would you recommend If you had to pick three or four of those books I see on your shelf, which other ones would you recommend to the audience?
You might have caught me looking back, and I can't seem to find it. Well, of course, you can't hear me now. You might have caught me looking backwards before. There's a book called The E-Myth, which is a great book, and there's a shorter version of The E-Myth called The E-Myth HVAC Contractor. And I was kind of hoping it was just lying around here, but I probably took it out to read it, or reread it. But even if you're not in the HVAC space, I really like that one because he just lands so many fundamentals so well. There's a book called The Pumpkin Plan by Michael Michalowicz. Really a big fan. And then there's the E-Myth, E-M-Y-T-H, E-Myth HVAC Contractor. Really, really like both of those books. I think they would be very effective for your audience. Again, even if you're not in the HVAC space.
For those watching.
Like that one. Yep.
I see you got Profit First back there too.
Yep. Big fan.
Very, very good. Very good. Cool. All right. So last question for you, then the housekeeping. But what is, Ben, one question that you wish more people would ask you? And then how would you answer that?
I guess I wished more people really said, when you say you offer a money-back guarantee to deliver 5 additional points of net profitability, again, that's another $50,000 per year, per million in revenue, that they just called me out as being full of crap because there's no way that I could deliver that and offer a money-back guarantee, and then really put on their listening ears to be like, let me see if I got this straight. You're guaranteeing that I'm going to make a ton more money or I get my money back. Like, that seems impossible. And then I could just explain to them, while it takes a long time to build up a $10 million business, it doesn't take that long to stop doing the 5 things where you're losing money. And if we show you the 5 things that if you just stop doing them, you'd make another $1 million a year. All you got to do now is like clear out the cobwebs under there or between there and just stop doing at least 2 or 3 of them right away. And boom, you're making a lot more money. So, I mean, Josh gave you an example. He didn't say 10 million. He said 12 million. He probably went from 12 million to 10 million by stopping doing $2 million worth of dumb stuff. And then boom, his company was double the profitability. I don't know what your profitability was before if you want to share, but chances are by being 5 to 7% net profitability more profitable, that probably doubled your profitability and you're back to double digits. And the difference between being low single digits and 10 or a little bit more is the difference between every day being a struggle and not being able to face your husband or wife having terrible cash flow issues, heartaches, heartburn and headaches and not being able to sleep. That's what happens to me. People say I'm the profit doctor, but I'm really the real doctor for these entrepreneurs. They come, can't sleep, stress, money problems with their husband or wife, embarrassed, feel bad about themselves as a business owners, and then 5 to 10 point lift in net profitability. All of a sudden, they doubled their paycheck. They're making more money. They've got solid cash flow. They feel confident about themselves as an entrepreneur. They're proud to go home. They're taking more time with their family. Nothing like a little 5 or 10% of profitability lift to, really make a huge difference. I mean, you could just share with your audience, how did it feel going from whatever it was when you were sucking at 12 million to whatever it was when you were not sucking at 10 million? How did you feel about yourself? Any different?
You know what it felt like, Ben? It felt like that boulder that I was continuing to push up the hill that I was able to take off the backpack full of bricks.
Yeah. Did you feel better about yourself? Like, I know what I'm doing. I'm a confident guy versus like, oh my God, I must be an idiot. Why is everything going wrong?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, when your identity is wrapped up so closely in being a business owner,
yeah,
and you know that it is, especially if you have a business of that size, doing that
sure.
revenue, right?
Yep.
Of course, because
Yep.
you immediately relate yourself to that business, and when it's not doing well, you're not doing well. When it is doing well, you are doing well.
Yeah.
There's no other way to put it.
And the key thing is people other than you are rating your business on size. But the thing that will drive your happiness, your financial success, your joy with your kids and partner is going to be driven by things like profitability and cash flow. That phrase you mentioned, revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is king. Come to, here's the plug, brace yourself, www.profitdoctor.com, PROFITDOCTOR, like spelled the regular way, .com, and book a slot with me, see if I can diagnose some of your issues, download some of our resources. We've got tons of videos and resources that can help you. If you're like most of your audience are kind of probably DIY people. So if you want to DIY it, we got the resources. Or if you just want to doc, just patch up my broken leg, I got to get back to work. Let's help you.
Awesome. Ben, thank you so much for spending your valuable time with me and my audience today. I know I got a ton of value out of it. I can't speak for them, but I will. I know they got a ton of value out of it as well.
My pleasure. I think we plowed a lot of ground, but just to recap a couple of things, profit does not equal revenue. That's like a psychology thing or like a big blind spot for a lot of business owners. And as soon as you're like, I'm going to put 20% of the time on my calendar to fixing profitability, you've already won the game. And then the biggest way to win fastest is to stop doing those things in your business where you continue to lose money and you've already tried to fix for years and you're just probably better off stop doing it. I call that less worst. So stop doing the worst stuff, right? And the tool for that is the 50-20 rule. Just identify the worst 20% of your worst offenders, and the worst offenders are the biggest opportunity areas, and just cut the bottom, half of that bottom chunk quickly. You don't have to think about it because you're not trying to distinguish, A minuses from B pluses down there. You're just firing the Fs. And if you accidentally fire a D instead of an F, whether that's a customer or a subcontractor or a market segment, you're going to be better off without the Ds too. So if you accidentally lose a D in the process of trying to get rid of Fs, you're still winning. So it's very, very robust. You can make mistakes and still come out way ahead.